Let's move on to Calvin. And like we did with Luther, we'll start with where he disagrees with the fathers on a particular issue, namely free will, grace, and predestination. Again, I have Joe Heschmeyer to thank for tipping me off to this video that he made 16 months ago regarding Calvin versus the early church on the issues of free will, grace, and predestination. In his Institutes, Calvin accuses the early fathers of being confused, vacillating, and contradictory, and yet also admits that all of them are opposed to him, though he claims Augustine as his own. Of course, this doesn't stop Calvin from thinking he knows better than the fathers. It's worth noting that Joe Heschmeyer does demonstrate in his video that even Augustine is not a friend to Calvin on this issue. At the very beginning of his Institutes, in his preface, or letter to the French king, Calvin criticizes the fathers in much more sweeping terms, even as he calls them holy, and even makes the bold claim that the fathers support him more than Catholicism. He is hesitant to refer to them as an authority, thinks they were merely ordinary men in some things, accuses them of slips and errors, and of being ignorant of many things, and being opposed to each other and within themselves. This is a common rhetorical trope of Protestants, to exaggerate the doctrinal differences among the fathers, when they actually all agree, more or less, on the nature of baptism, the Eucharist, and church governance, as even Joe Heschmeyer's book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, handily proves. Now, Calvin sees the writings of the fathers as merely instruments to serve his own purposes, not as something to learn from, honor, or obey. And like Luther, he pits obedience to Christ against obedience to the consensus of the early fathers. Like Luther, when he talks of the Lord's Supper, Calvin here also accuses the fathers of erring, of being worthy of being justly censured. He admits that the fathers use the term sacrifice to refer to the Eucharist and the Lord's Supper, but engages in special pleading that the fathers didn't really mean it. Again, Calvin thinks he knows better than the fathers and feels justified in criticizing and accusing them. Here in these last citations regarding Clement of Rome and Ignatius of Antioch, we see Calvin doesn't even bother trying to co-opt these earliest fathers for his views, or even claim to know better than them. He merely dismisses them as spurious, contrived, and absurd. He doesn't offer anything to support this view. One might reasonably infer that Calvin knows just how Catholic these writings are and rejects them on that basis alone. So here we have Calvin employing the third approach, the radical skeptical approach, that is ignorant of or ignores both the internal and external historical testimony to the authenticity of these earliest writings. It's reminiscent of James White casting doubt on the authenticity of Ignatius's writings. There's nothing new under the sun.